Hello, and welcome to Looking to Score, the podcast where we geek out about movie scores, their composers, and everything else in between. I'm Brennan, and joining me, as always, is the man with the golden arm, Brett Blake. How are you?
I'm doing very well. But unlike the man with the golden arm, I don't think I have a hopeless addiction condition.
Okay, so. That's good. And we also have a very special guest with us. The one, the only, Brenton Thom.
Ooh,
how are you?
Good. Am I like the man with the golden tooth, or what's my special nickname? Do I get one?
You can be
John Hammond's senior advisor on all matters.
The park lawyer.
Yeah. Son of Gennaro.
Yeah. Jay. All right, it doesn't matter.
All right, we're coming at you with a very special episode today. We are doing a deep dive into the John Williams Jurassic Park scores. Right. Suggested here by our colleague Brenton.
Yeah, this is definitely a favorite for me, for sure. And I know it's a favorite for you, too, because I think this is the one movie we all have in common. I think we all saw this movie together in 3D, the 25th anniversary for Jurassic Park as well.
I think
20th. So. Don't make us that old. It was the 20th anniversary.
Excuse me, 20th. But still, man, it was a magical event.
Now, before we get into this, I have a very important question to ask you both. What is your favorite dinosaur?
Do you mean favorite dinosaur from this movie or just favorite dinosaur in general?
It can be in-gen bred dinosaurs. It can be real-life dinosaurs. Just tell me what your favorite dinosaur is.
All right, so mine was a favorite, and I got it from this movie. Just how unique it was, but I do like the way it looks, especially the adult version of it, and that's the Dilophosaurus.
Can't go wrong with that.
My pick is just the classic Triceratops. Like Dr. Grant says in the movie, it's been a favorite since I was a kid. It remains one of my favorites. And I think it was a favorite even before I saw this movie, but I think this movie certainly helped seeing it sort of realized in the flesh. So yeah, Triceratops for me.
I think it's also Spielberg's favorite as well, which is probably why.
That makes sense.
My favorite is Stegosaurus. I know the Milwaukee Public Museum has a giant Stegosaurus in there, and I don't know. I've always liked that one.
Is that the one where it's being eaten by the T-Rex, or is that a Triceratops?
I think it was a Triceratops. Sorry, Brett.
That's okay.
All right. So anyways, why are we doing this? Why are we doing a deep dive, Brenton?
Well, I kind of offered the suggestion, folks. Hey, you guys want to do Jurassic Park? We all love this movie, but that's really what it comes down to. We love this movie. At least I love this movie. It meant a lot to me. It definitely, I don't know. It means a lot, and I would love to talk about this score just because there are so many different elements, themes, and I don't know. Just the music sends a good shiver down my spine, and raises the hair on my neck. I like the score, and I want to talk about it. I want to share it with people.
My take on a deep dive, obviously going beyond the fact that I love this movie and I love this score, is that this will sort of give us the opportunity to really break down how John Williams uses theme throughout a score. And this is a case where it's more manageable because we're just talking about two scores. He's obviously done many series. In the Star Wars saga, he did 9 scores. In Indiana Jones, he's done 4, soon to be 5. Harry Potter, he did 3. Here, he just did 2. So we can still see how he sort of evolves movie to movie, but yet it's contained enough that we can actually sort of break down these scores in sort of a reasonable amount of time.
Yeah, and do we want to talk about, we kind of touched on it, but what Jurassic Park as a whole means to us?
Sure. I've told this story, I believe, maybe on our first couple of episodes of this podcast. So I'll do the really abbreviated version. But, I saw Jurassic Park in the theater, summer of 1993. I was 6 years old, and it just had a tremendous impact on me. And a large reason for that is because of how effective the score is in the movie. And the music just made an incredible impression on me.
Yeah, I'm going to have to concur and agree with Brett on that. I, again, saw it in theaters while I was 6. And this, mind you, this was the first movie I ever seen in theaters. We had a lot of home movies and stuff like that watching at home, but this was the first actual movie I got to see in the cinema. And it blew me away. Seeing something on the big screen, you got the surround sound, the music that just enhances the story so much. And I remember being terrified as a kid. This movie scared me so much as a kid. Like, I remember being in school afraid to go to lunch because there'd be raptors in the hall trying to get me. This movie had a huge impact on me, and I love it. I love it so much.
And you mentioned the sort of the sound and stuff. The sound mix, especially in the theater, this is one of the best mixed films ever in terms of how it balances sound effects and music. It's just a very powerful sonic experience that I don't even think has ever been fully recreated, even when it's been re-released.
Absolutely. Like, I know when we saw the 20th anniversary of this in 3D, there were sounds I haven't heard before, or at least I didn't hear them as well as you did from at home. Just that experience of like hearing, it felt like the sound was in 3D when we were watching it as well. I just wish I could recreate that experience of seeing it in 93 and like that audio experience versus just like the flat screen from at home. Like, you got the audio right in front of you versus around, like, wasn't it DTS audio? Like, whatever the sound system they created for it?
Yeah, it was a specialized mix system that then films after that subsequently used. But I'm pretty sure, yes, Jurassic Park debuted. I don't know if it was DTS, but it was some kind of a specialized sound format, yes.
Yeah, for me, I agree with you, Brenton. I did see this in theaters as a kid, and it does kind of scare you. But today, it's kind of like a comfort movie. I mean, if you can call a movie about dinosaurs on the loose attacking people comforting, but
sure.
I think as adults and former film students, I think we can appreciate the film craft of it much more today because it still holds up.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
All right, so why don't we get into it? We're going to talk about some of the themes, motifs, and techniques in both the Jurassic Park and the Lost World scores. So, Brett, why don't you start us off here with our first one?
Sure. So we're going to talk about first themes that appear in both scores. And the first one we're going to talk about is actually the first theme that you hear in the score for Jurassic Park. And that is what has been sort of casually referred to as the carnivore motif. And you hear that very clearly played on the shakuhachi flute in the opening titles. So let's take a listen to that.
Yeah, I think primal is the one word that's going to come up a lot more as we go along. And that's what you feel right away with that flute flourish and some of those creeping bass notes in that cue.
Yes.
I almost want to argue, because I know we labeled this the carnivore motif, because I think I had this discussion with you years ago, I think maybe in college, where I think I referred to it as the velociraptor motif. And I thought that for the longest time, and I was actually going to say maybe this shouldn't be called the carnivore motif, but the raptor motif. However, after re-listening to some of the scores, like even when the T-Rex is chasing the Jeep, and when the T-Rex shows up, it's the same motif. So like, okay, this is not just the raptor motif. This is the carnivore motif. So,
well, you mentioned like when the T-Rex shows up at the very end in the movie, they track in music from earlier in the film, but on the album you can hear what John Williams wrote for that moment. And in that moment, which we can play right here, it's from the T-Rex rescue and finale, he's just sort of blaring out the carnivore motif. So it's definitely meant to personify the more dangerous dinosaurs. So let's listen to T-Rex rescue and finale.
kind of his trademark, leaning heavily on brass here for those sharp flourishes. And it's also punctuated by the French horns as well.
Yes. Now, when we move into The Lost World, he only uses this theme once in the score. And this actually circles back to Brenton's point about, well, is it really more the raptor theme? He uses it in The Lost World the very first time that the velociraptors are discussed. And it's in a cue called Reading the Map, and it's again played on the shakuhachi. And it's pretty effective and pretty creepy. So let's take a listen to that. And this is a theme that works very well either in that sort of mysterious, almost scary sort of setting, or as almost like an action motif. It's versatile in that way that it can work sort of in a couple of different sort of tonal modes. All right, so let's move on to the next theme we want to discuss, which I guess we would call is either the theme for Jurassic Park, the island itself, or yeah, I guess that's what it could be. Maybe just an all-purpose adventure theme for the movies. The first statement of this theme heard in Jurassic Park is in the cue Journey to the Island, and it happens when John Hammond kind of turns and says, there it is, and we get our first reveal of the island itself. And that's the moment when I was watching this movie for the first time, especially with the way that the music was mixed, that I felt like pushed back into my seat by this theme, very stridently being played by the orchestra. So let's listen to this piece from Journey to the Island.
You know, I think we had a question about, or at least I had a question about that, because did we discuss before in the past about whether or not the score was created first and then they synced it with editing, or was it edited and then the score was made to the edit? Because there's some really good synchronizations with the waves and the music where it just felt like, did they do that on purpose? I mean, most likely they did it on purpose, but which way was it done? Was it edited to the music, or the music was created to the edit?
I'm reasonably certain that it was edited and then John Williams scored the edit to get those sync points exactly right. And the reason I say that is because there's a famous anecdote about when they were recording E.T. and the bike chase at the end leading into the finale of that score, how it was so difficult for the orchestra to hit all of these sync points that Spielberg told Williams, just record the piece and I will go back in and tweak the edit. And that's a notable story because that's normally not how they would work. So I think in this case, there aren't that many moments where John Williams would have to acknowledge this or that they would have to, record the piece and then he would go in and tweak the actual edit of the picture. But either way, the music fits this sequence just perfectly. And I think it's a great theme. There could be a debate as to whether or not this is the best theme in the score. If you polled John Williams fans, half of them might say this one, half of them might say another one that we're going to talk about. But this is sort of the first moment of the movie when this theme is introduced, where it's like it really hits you sort of over the head with it in a great way. And then it's used for the rest of the score kind of in a more subdued fashion. One of my favorite usages of the theme is in a much more gentle mode. It's in a cue called the history lesson. And it's where sort of Tim is following Grant from car to car and they're having this sort of semi-humorous little exchange. And it's a much more gentle and sort of peaceful treatment of this theme. And I think it works very well. So let's listen to the history lesson. Now then, moving into The Lost World, this theme shows up in a few different points, none of which are really all that, I would say, forceful. They're sort of much more subdued and almost atmospheric. I think the first time you hear it in The Lost World is in a cue called Revealing the Plans, which has a little bit of a kind of a quasi-hopeful quality, but also a mysterious quality. And then there's another cue called Spilling Petrol and Horning In, which sort of has it running underneath a little bit of a darker piece.
Yeah, it feels in that particular cue very distant, and I think it only seems to be used when we're with the protagonists or if, they're doing something to subvert whatever nefarious thing is going on the island. Right.
It's kind of used, again, as a little bit of a kind of an adventure theme, but this score is much darker than the first Jurassic Park score. So it's almost like an echo of the past whenever we hear this theme. It's never used in a very forceful or pronounced way. Another example would be in a cue called The Trek. So it never regains sort of the forceful power of that first time that we hear it in Jurassic Park. It's sort of like
not as grandiose.
Exactly. Cool. The next theme we wanted to talk about is arguably the main theme of Jurassic Park. Again, it's probably either a toss-up between this or the island theme we just talked about. It's essentially the theme for the dinosaurs themselves. And we get sort of our big, stately presentation of this theme in the cue Journey to the Island.
Yep, it's the most iconic, the most reverent theme, and one of awe. I would argue that it's the herbivores theme. it's majestic.
Sure.
Yeah, basically.
It's innocent, and it's, I don't know, innocent is the best way I can describe it, where it's not as threatening as the other pieces would be.
Right. Well, and you hear that innocent quality the next couple times that this theme is performed throughout the score, particularly in the cue A Tree for My Bed, where it is very much sort of characterized in a childlike sort of way.
Yeah, again, like we've talked about before, this is sort of your exhale moment. It's kind of like a lullaby and a calm after one of the most intense sequences in the film.
Right. Then when we move into The Lost World, again, just like the Island theme, it's treated in a little bit of a darker way, a little bit of a, this theme is a shadow of the past kind of a situation. So you're going to hear it very almost kind of deconstructed at the beginning of a cue called Revealing the Plans. All right, another element that we wanted to talk about that is shared between both scores, that is not a theme per se, is this idea of jungle percussion. And the first Jurassic Park score doesn't really have a lot of this, but you can definitely hear it in the cue Jurassic Park Gate. And when you listen to this, you will sort of get the flavor of what we're talking about when we say jungle percussion. Like it just sort of evokes the idea that you're on an adventure in the jungle.
I would almost argue that the intro titles, the title cards, because you get a tease of it, of the drums, gong, and you're coming in, you see intro titles, and the first shot you see is the jungle. And it teased in the carnivore theme in there, but it's like a whole different ball game. It's like, hey, there are no more fences here. We're in the jungle.
I was going to preface this section by saying that these cues are kind of like the King Kong moments. Like if John Williams was going to write a score for a King Kong movie, it probably would have sounded like the following cues. And even with the cue Jurassic Park gate, I think there are parallels in the set design to the park gate as an homage to King Kong.
Yes, the wall, King Kong. And obviously Ian Malcolm makes direct reference to that, which is, and I think that probably informed, I would bet that line sort of informed the approach that John Williams took with that cue. But again, going through the rest of the Jurassic Park score, even in the action moments, you very rarely get percussion like you hear in Jurassic Park Gate. But when we get into the Lost World, like Brenton said, whole new ball game. This is sort of the defining characteristic of the Lost World, in my opinion, is this very percussion heavy, very inventive percussion writing is all throughout this score. It's absolutely all over the place. If you listen to a cue called Fire at Camp and Corporate Helicopters, you definitely get a sense of what we're talking about.
Yeah, it's much more threatening and primal sounding because there's that, like you said, Brenton, the sense of untamed wilderness on the island or whatever.
And just a couple other examples. Again, you could pull any cue from the Lost World at random, and you probably have a pretty good chance that you're going to hear some of this percussion. But there's a cue called On the Glass. And there's also a cue called The Raptors Appear. And I think all of these cues give you a pretty good idea of what this score sounds like, at least in terms of how it uses percussion.
Right. The tempo is much quicker and frantic, and again, heightened by that punctuation of the brass.
The next thing we wanted to talk about is, again, not so much an actual theme as it is an approach. And it's what I have sort of referred to as the awe of the dinosaurs, which is a little bit different than the dinosaur theme or the herbivore theme we talked about. It's, again, it's not thematic so much as it is trying to evoke a similar sort of feeling in the audience. So if you listen to a piece called Ailing Triceratops, and then move into the Lost World and listen to a piece called the Stegosaurus. You will hear that there's a generalized sort of sense of trying to get the audience in the headspace of these animals are amazing. But it's not as reverent or thematic as the actual sort of main dinosaur herbivore theme that we heard earlier. Okay, so now we're going to shift into talking about themes or motifs or ideas that are distinctly in one film or the other. And the first one that jumped out to me when I started sort of outlining how I wanted to approach this episode is the Remembering Petticoat Lane theme from Jurassic Park, which I would say is sort of characterizing John Hammond. It's not reprised as a theme for him throughout the score. It's sort of a distinct piece for one scene in the movie, but it definitely fleshes out sort of the ambitions and the potential regrets of the character in a very effective way. So let's listen to Remembering Petticoat Lane.
This piece is kind of out of left field, but it really adds that gravitas to the moment. It's a haunting melody for a man haunted by his hubris.
Yeah, and it humanizes John Hammond in a really, I think, important and effective way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Brenton, we've talked many times over the years about the differences between John Hammond in the book and John Hammond in the movie. And I think we come down in slightly different places on this. I mean, I think they made the right choice for the movie to make John Hammond sympathetic. And you get a cue like this that definitely helps you understand that this is a guy who, yes, wants to make money, but really wants to entertain people and show them something absolutely astounding. And there's some, pathos in that I think works really well because of this music.
I concur, and I think this score, accompanied with the very end where they're boarding the helicopter, leaving the park, and like looking at he's looking back and he hears the Brachiosaurus screaming. It's like really ties in his I wouldn't say regret, but his what if, his dream collapsing in front of him.
Okay, next, continuing on in Jurassic Park, is what I had sort of always heard referred to as the searching motif, because it sort of accompanies various people in the aftermath of the T-Rex attack sort of looking for the rest of the characters. It's sort of this undulating, churning little motif that is not really a theme, but it's reprised a couple times in subsequent cues. And I think you hear it most clearly at the beginning of a cue called High Wire Stunts.
Yeah, so because in lieu with your searching motif with that score we heard, there's other bits and pieces throughout the Jurassic Park score that I wouldn't say are out of place, but they don't sound like the rest. And I feel like they kind of almost fit that category of like searching, or I like to call them like growing issues or concerns. Scores you can hear like Dennis steals the embryo. Goat bait is another one. Coming of the Storm, where it's this looming kind of mysterious, growing ambient type music that shows that a threat is approaching. And you can also almost argue that those three scores are almost I won't say Dennis Nedry type theme, but they do have.
There's an ominous quality.
Yes.
And a sort of a sense of dread that something bad is going to be happening very shortly on this island.
And he's in a rush. So you get that kind of, I'm stealing the embryos. I gotta go. I gotta get to the boat.
18 minutes. 18-minute window.
E-stock.
Should have been there by now. Okay, moving on. One last piece that I wanted to touch on in Jurassic Park is how John Williams musically characterizes the concept of dinosaurs breeding. So obviously there's a pretty memorable scene where they watch a baby raptor hatch out of an egg, and Williams scores that as sort of a choral piece that has a little bit of mystery to it, but it's sort of a gentle, I would say moderately uplifting and sort of, this is the awe and majesty of science type of a thing going on in terms of the sound. So let's listen to Hatching Baby Raptor.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, that's the only choral element that he's used in the score.
Until the next piece that I'm going to touch on, which is later in the movie when Grant and Tim and Lex stumble upon eggs that have hatched in the wild in the park. And Williams sort of reprises not the exact same melodic material, but he brings in a sort of high choral piece again, characterized in a much more sort of ominous way. But it is an intentional sort of reminder of the previous scene where we saw eggs having been hatched. And that cue is called Life Finds a Way.
It's the egg theme.
Yeah.
Yes, the egg motif. Okay, let's transition now into the Lost World score and themes and ideas that are only present there. And I think the most notable one to begin talking about is what Williams himself calls the island's voice motif. And this is probably the most prominent thematic idea in the entire Lost World score. It's all over the place in a lot of pretty subtle ways, sometimes in very in-your-face ways, which you're going to hear shortly here. And it's kind of a cousin of the carnivore motif from Jurassic Park. It's sort of been inverted. So whereas the carnivore motif is primarily a descending motif, this is more of an ascending motif. And I think it works very well, particularly as a very mysterious theme, which is the mode you hear it in when we first hear it in the score, which is in a cue called The Island's Voice. Then moving on, again, you hear it all throughout the score in various different ways. As you get towards the end of the score, it becomes much more of an action motif. And you hear that particularly in the cue Visitor in San Diego, which is part of the finale of the score. And it just becomes this sort of unstoppable, repetitive action motif that really works well to characterize sort of the threat of an unstoppable T-Rex on the streets of San Diego. So this is Visitor in San Diego.
I really like that we're talking about both these movies, Jurassic Park and The Lost World, because I feel both of these scores almost complement each other, even though they're two separate movies. Because the first score for Jurassic Park is very grandiose. It's not mysterious, but it's like kind of a not adventurous, but very
Majestic.
Adventurous.
Yeah, awe-inspiring, like wonder. And then that whole project fails, like the park, right? And then this second movie, this second score is like the secrets. It's what's behind the smoke screen and mirrors. You know, it's the secretness that's behind it, which is very adventure driven and dark and gritty and rainy. And I don't know. I like these two scores together. You can listen to both separately, but it's almost like, hey, this is what we got. This is actually the secret. This is actually what's behind it all.
Yeah, I think you could almost characterize it as saying Jurassic Park is an optimistic score because it's all about the promise of what Jurassic Park could be, whereas The Lost World is a more cynical score in the sense that here's the truth, it all went to hell and it was a terrible idea and everything's awful. And you know, there are exceptions to both of those sort of tones in each score, but I think that's sort of generally the approach if you boiled it down one score to the next.
I was going to comment on this in our next theme that we talk about here, which is the Lost World theme, because we find that the main theme that we kind of know and love from the first movie is used very sparingly in the Lost World score. And I think that's probably because, you know, we're at Site B, Isla Sorna, which doesn't have that awe and grandeur that was originally associated with Isla Nublar in the first film. So we get kind of an inverted Jurassic Park theme here.
Yeah, the main Lost World theme is a pretty classical style. I mean, you know, we talked about maybe a King Kong influence, but this sounds sort of like Max Steiner-ish, brought into the 1990s, very much a throwback kind of adventure theme, which obviously you get its major presentation in the concert suite, which you hear on the album, which is called The Lost World. So maybe let's play a little of that. And then as Williams uses it in the score proper, it sort of bookends the score. You hear it as the characters are arriving at the island, which is in the cue to the island. And then you really don't hear it again until, I guess you'd say, the end of the second act. The Lost World is an oddly structured movie because it feels like it sort of has 2/3 acts almost. But you hear this theme for the last time as characters are leaving the island and heading back to San Diego, and that's a cue called Heading North. So it's interesting that Williams actually uses that island voice motif more frequently throughout the score, almost as the score's main theme, but then the score is bookended on either side by this Lost World theme.
Yeah, I agree that the Lost World is definitely more adventurous because you don't have the fences, you don't have the infrastructure. It's like you're out there in the jungle in this wilderness with these wild creatures, these dangerous prehistoric animals, and there's more of an adventure and threat to it in the Lost World theme as opposed to the Jurassic Park theme.
All right, so that's sort of how we've broken down both these scores. And now at the end here, we're going to talk about a specific piece each of us are going to pick. And it's not necessarily going to neatly showcase everything that we talked about because that would be just impossible. So we're just going to sort of highlight a cue or part of a cue that we think is particularly interesting to us. So, Breanne, why don't you go first here?
Sure. The one I picked is called Monster on the Loose from the Lost World. And this one really highlights the threatening atmosphere of, what's going on with the dinosaurs on the mainland of California. So you get this really driving, intense bass sound that's just punctuating throughout this piece. And I just love the threatening nature of it. It really brings out that kind of King Kong aspect that we were talking about before.
sort of repetitive blaring low brass
Mm-hmm.
in this cue that, and he titled this cue Monster on the Loose, and I think that's perfect because this does sound like monster music to me. All right, Brenton, your pick.
All right, so I have a few here because Jurassic Park and The Lost World are two separate movies, and I can't just pick one for both. So for Jurassic Park, I'm going to go with Jurassic Park Gate. And the reason being is I'm a big fan of that jungle, that motif of the jungle and threat that's there. And then in the Lost World, which uses more of that jungle theme, I'd probably have to use To the Island.
Okay, and my pick is from the cue Welcome to Jurassic Park from Jurassic Park, which is essentially the end credits piece of the score. And what I wanted to highlight here is kind of like the last minute and a half to 2 minutes of this piece, which is you sort of get a very gentle presentation of the dinosaur / herbivore theme that then segues into a very dark and mysterious sort of high string laden version of the carnivore motif that then takes us out and sort of fades out in a very eerie way. And Brenton, I know you like this part of the cue a lot.
I do. I really do like the ending cue. Just hearing that carnivore motif. It's very mysterious. It's very eerie. But I don't want to, kind of do the same theme as you. Is like, hey, I like the same one. I mean, we both like it. I mean, we like all these scores, but I just wanted to choose something different.
Yeah, well, I mean, full disclosure, I claimed this piece first because I knew it might be one that you'd want to talk about. So I wanted to make sure I called dibs on it.
Sneaky.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive episode. Brenton, thank you so much for joining us and giving this idea to us. Is there anything you want to plug before we say our goodbyes?
I just want to say thanks for having me on the show. I guess the only thing I can plug is if anyone likes backpacking or outdoor adventure stuff, just check out my YouTube channel. It's Thom's National Trails. It's THOM, Tom. And yeah, thanks for having me on.
Cool.
Thank you for being here.
And you can check out our companion playlists on Spotify. We will have some of the cues here. A lot of these cues are from the complete scores, so they may not be available. But you can check them out on YouTube, because YouTube has everything. So until then, thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.
See you later.
Bye.
Thanks, y'all.